Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the University of Denver. My name is Tom Romero, and in addition to being a professor of law and history, I'm the faculty director of the University of Denver's Interdisciplinary Research Institute for the Study of Inequality, or IRISE. As we start today, I would like to invite Olga Gonzalez, Executive Director of Cultivando, to help me in giving a land acknowledgement. So we would like to begin today by acknowledging that we are on indigenous land. We are in the homeland of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho. We also recognize the 48 contemporary tribal nations that are historically tied to the lands that make up the state of Colorado.
This land where we work, live, and learn has been a site of human activity for 13,000 years. Thus, we honor elders past, present, and future, and those who have stewarded this land throughout 500 generations.
We also want to recognize the repeated violations of sovereignty and territory that have impacted the original inhabitants of this land for the past 400 years. We know that this space and nation were founded upon beliefs, attitudes, and ideas that continue to enact exclusions and erasures of indigenous peoples. Indeed, we at DU played a distinct role in the Sand Creek Massacre and ourselves struggled to reconcile the past with a substantive commitment to equity, inclusion, diversity, and most importantly, justice.
We would also affirm that this type of acknowledgement, although gaining popularity, is insufficient. It doesn't undo the generational harm that has been done and continues to be perpetrated now against indigenous people, their land, and their sovereignty.
May this acknowledgement demonstrate a commitment from all of us connected to IRISE and the University of Denver to work together to dismantle ongoing legacies of settler colonialism, oppression, and inequities, and to recognize the hundreds of indigenous nations who continue to resist, live, create, and uphold their sacred relations across the lands. Thank you, Olga. Before I turn over the floor to Olga and Cultivando, I wanted to give a little context of why we are here today. As many of you know, DU is a private university committed to the public good. For the last 10 years, IRISE has worked to accomplish this mission by supporting DU faculty and students to work with community partners like Cultivando to better understand, respond to, and provide meaningful solutions to deep-rooted and systemic forms of racial inequity. As a result, we have co-created multifaceted research, impactful scholarship, and transformative creative works that centers those voices, perspectives, and solutions of those communities most vulnerable to and impacted by inequity, inequality, and injustice. As climate change has made us all aware, perhaps no form of injustice is as acute as those systemic and institutional inequities that impact the air we breathe and the water we drink. Today, 2.4 million Coloradoans are disproportionately impacted by dirty air and unsafe drinking water. Many of those individuals, many of those Coloradoans come from communities of color. It is therefore my honor today to introduce an organization that has long been on the forefront of better understanding and promoting meaningful solutions to the environmental injustice impacting their community. Cultivando serves the Latino, Latina, and Latine community in Adams County and focuses on community leadership to advance health equity through advocacy, collaboration, and policy change. Cultivando firmly believes that all people have the power to maintain fair and equitable systems and to ensure opportunities for their community to thrive. The organization is led by Olga Gonzalez, who is also this year serving as an IRISE visiting community scholar. Without further ado, let me turn the podium over to Olga.
Good morning, buenos dias. Thank you all for being here. Thanks again to the University of Denver, the IRISE office, DU Law, and the DU School of Social Work for being here and helping us with this event. I also would like to thank our team of promotoras from Cultivando. You could raise your hand for being here and doing amazing work. Our partners who are here in support, and I see you all sprinkled, and especially our community members who are sitting here in the front rows. Thank you for being here and for your courage and your dedication. So again, Cultivando is an organization that serves the Latino community and focuses on community leadership to advance health equity through advocacy, collaboration, and policy change. Our work is based on our organizational values of community-led work, social justice, and collaborative leadership. We firmly believe that all people have the power to maintain fair and equitable systems and to ensure opportunities for their communities to thrive. And with that in mind, our organization is composed of women who live in the communities in which we do our work and who do the bulk of our education and advocacy work. Forgot I had slides. So that's what I just shared with you. Also, a little bit about the history. Before we begin our press conference and discussion today, I'd like to give you some background information about the Suncor Oil Refinery and about Cultivando's role in this important project. This information will help you to better understand why the residents in the areas surrounding the refinery wanted Cultivando to conduct this air monitoring and social impact study. The oil refinery began operations in 1940. It's gone through several ownerships, but today it's owned by one of the largest corporations in Canada, Suncor. Suncor recently posted gross profits of almost $28 billion for 2022. Suncor is one of the two largest producers of tar sands in Canada. Tar sands are considered by many to be the dirtiest forms of fossil fuels. Although some parts of the refinery were shut down for a couple of months, this past winter for safety reasons, when fully operational, it produces an average of 98,000 barrels of fuel a day. It's been said that as much as 40% of the gasoline used in the Denver area comes from the refinery. According to the state of Colorado, Suncor is one of the largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the state. It emits about 1 million tons each year. Its greenhouse gas releases are roughly equivalent to the annual tailpipe emissions of the 200,000 plus new cars sold in the state last year. As bad as Suncor's greenhouse gas emissions are for climate, our emphasis today will be on the other pollutants released by Suncor and other smaller industries operating within the Suncor corridor. Our emphasis today will be on chemicals such as benzene, sulfur dioxide, radioactive particles, soot, and other pollutants that adversely impact people's health. On that note, let me say that Suncor has been fined repeatedly over the years for releases of pollutants exceeding its rather generous permitting limits. In 2019, was assessed as a significant fine of $9 million for repeated infractions. Oddly, most of that money went back to Suncor so that it could re-examine and improve its operations. We received a big part of the remainder to conduct this study. This money was voted to us by residents of Commerce City who felt that state and local government had failed to protect their health, but they trusted our team of promotoras to lead local air monitoring efforts. I've just put a map on the screen. It shows much of the Denver area. The area within the 2-mile circle on the map is our area of concentration. It includes South Commerce City, Globeville, and Elyria Swansea. The latter two are within the Denver city boundaries. Over 10,000 people live and raise families in this area. This circle basically embraces the population of zip code 80216. It includes the DU area and an overall population of over 2.5 million people. There are mountains of studies that have been conducted about the harms fossil fuel development does to human health and the environment. Many of those studies concentrate on fracking or unconventional drilling. The oil that Suncor refines is mostly a frack product from operations in northern Colorado. Briefly, here are a few slides of oil and gas development and their impact, which were conducted here in Colorado. A 2019 study by Dr. Lisa McKenzie at the Colorado School of Public Health found that mothers living in areas with the most intense levels of oil and gas activity were about 40 to 70% more likely to have children with heart defects. Heart defects are the leading cause of death among infants with birth defects. According to this study, these infants are less likely to thrive, are more likely to have developmental problems, and more vulnerable to brain injury. This study says particulate matter or soot from oil and gas operations could lead to these negative health impacts. Please remember this observation as Dr. Helmig discusses the high level of particulates in our air quality measurements inside the Suncor corridor. Dr. Brown and Wilma Subra, our health team, will discuss the possible human health impacts. In a later pilot study, partially funded by the American Cancer Society, Dr. McKenzie found that children with specific kinds of cancer, all were 4 times more likely to be living in areas with the highest level of oil and gas activity. She said she chose to focus on leukemia because of its relation to the chemical benzene. Benzene is a colorless, flammable liquid and a natural part of crude oil and gasoline production. Once again, please pay close attention to our team's discussion of benzene readings and their potential human health implications. And let's not forget older people. A recent Harvard study of more than 15 million Medicare recipients found that older citizens, 65 years old and up, living near oil and gas development were at higher risk for dying earlier than those who lived in areas without oil and gas development. Another Colorado example, a couple of years ago, the CEO of Mental Health Colorado called for a systemic shift away from fossil fuels, noting that the oil industry's activities in the state have led to chronic stress, depression, anxiety, and a feeling of powerlessness among Colorado residents living near oil and gas development. He urged true representation in the decision-making process as necessary to cure this social disease. Later in this program, Drs. Ramona Beltran and Stephanie Mellon will discuss their findings concerning the outlook and attitudes of people they've interviewed who live near the Suncor oil refinery. Both are social scientists. Dr. Beltran teaches right here at DU, and Dr. Mellon teaches at CSU. A 2020 study by the University of Texas Medical School found that people living within 10 miles of a refinery had a significantly greater risk of contracting a wide range of cancers as compared to those who lived 20 to 30 miles distance. A recent study by Harvard University found that radioactive particulates were transported more than 10 miles from fracking sites. Suncor processes fracked oil and gas. We think of it as the largest fracking operation in the state. The project leader of the study, when asked if he would live downwind of such sites, responded, he wouldn't. With this background, I now give you Dr. Detlev Helmig. He is our chief atmospheric scientist and will explain what data we've gathered over the past year, explaining some of the public health implications. Through the fuller explanation of their health impacts, though the further explanation of the health impacts will be examined by Dr. David Brown and Wilma Subra later in our presentation.
So the monitoring study now has been going on for a little bit more than a year, and I'll provide here a summary of the overview of the program, as well as walk you through some of the main findings that we have to date. There's several partners coming together here to conduct the study, and I'm covering work by quite a few colleagues that are all listed here. There's my group with Boulder Air. We also have a contribution from Texas A&M University. And then, of course, the Cultivando group has helped on many, many different ends. So I want to acknowledge all these other partners who have helped with the study. And it's a very comprehensive project. It has many components. They are highlighted here with these different thumbnails. And I don't have the time today to cover all these individual aspects of it. So I've picked a few that I find have revealed the most compelling observations so far. So if you want more details on some of these other aspects, of course, I'm available to help with that. And the observations that are being made here with this air monitoring program are all available to you, to the public. They're presented on a public website in real time, around the clock, 24/7, every day of the year. So I encourage you to visit that website if you're curious about current air conditions and some other updates on the program. And there's 2 different classes of pollutants that we're monitoring here. We broke them up into gas phase pollutants. They're listed here, and as a whole, this is one of the most comprehensive air monitoring programs in the state. If you go through all these different gases that are listed here, there's more than 30, 40, if you count all the different volatile organic compounds. And so this is a very comprehensive, intense air monitoring program. So these are the gases. And then the other group we are looking at are particulates. So these are small particles, aerosols in the atmosphere that are of concern for human health, because the smaller the particles, the deeper they can penetrate into your lungs, and they can carry other pollutants that can then be taken up by a human body. And they're very, very small, as you can see on the scale here, in comparison to the cross-section of a human hair. So jump straight to the findings. And I've grouped them into 6 different aspects here, and I'll walk you through these in my presentation one by one. Show you the behavior of the pollutants, differences in locations, since we've studied in quite a few different places in the Commerce City area. I compare the pollutant levels we see in Commerce City with other locations around the state. I really want to emphasize that we're in an area here where there's not just one concerning air pollutant, but there are many occurring at the same time. I can show you what we understand so far, where these pollutants are coming from. And then something that's really brand new and exciting to us is a source of airborne radioactivity. Okay, so this is the first point. I'm showing here some of these particles. These are the PM10, the larger particles that we measure with an instrument at that fixed site. It's a monitoring station we set up just about a quarter mile north of the Suncor Refinery. And these are 2 days of data in October last year. It shows the concentration on the y-axis and the time then at the bottom on the x-axis. And the point I want to make here, and it's very important for a take-home message, that pollution levels go up and down, very dynamically all the time. If you happen to go out there, let's say at a certain time when levels are low, it may look not too concerning and pretty clean, but you come back just half an hour later and conditions may have changed very dramatically. You can see changes there, dynamic changes in concentrations by easily up to a factor of 1,000 within minutes. So in your urban areas where there's pollution sources nearby, what you encounter here is this dynamic up and down, levels go up and down depending on what type of operation there is at a given time, where the winds are coming from. So it's a very important aspect of this monitoring. And I want to show this with another example, and this is benzene. So the first one was for particles. This is benzene. I have on the left side some data, and this is just an hour of data of benzene measurements with an instrument that can measure very, very fast at 1 second time resolution. And this is data that was provided to us by another group, but they allowed me to show this because it shows how quickly benzene can go up within minutes. It will only stay up high for a few minutes, up to 50 parts per billion. So if you have high resolution measurements, you can see these very short-term spikes, very dramatic concentration increases. In the middle now, these are our measurements where we take 10-minute averages, because that's what the instruments provides to us. And you can see there's also a lot of change in benzene. The maximum we're seeing here is 5 parts per billion, so about a factor of 10 lower, because now we're averaging over 10 minutes. And then if you keep going on at the bottom right, those are weekly averages from our passive sampling. And here the maximum values are 1 ppb. And then at the very bottom, those are annual averages of benzene. And here, the maximum we see in this spatial network, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, is 0.4 parts per billion. So really need to watch at the time resolution. And the longer you average, the more you mask or suppress these very dynamic high pollution occurrences that we see very frequently in this urban environment. So let's look at how concentration changed throughout the year. So that's a full year of monitoring of benzene now at different locations. There's 5 places where we take weekly average samples for benzene. Things to point out is that among the different locations, and those are the vertical arrows, there's quite a bit of variability depending on where you measure within the area. And these are all within 4 or 5 miles radius in Commerce City. And then there's a clear seasonal cycles, pollution levels are lower in the summer and they go up in the winter. This is very common. This is not groundbreaking. This has been seen in other places. This is mostly driven by meteorology. But just so you're aware, in the winter, many of these pollutants are 2-3 times higher on average than what you see in the summer. Similar, there's a very clear change with time of day. These are diurnal cycles for two pollutants, benzene and hydrogen sulfide. And on the x-axis, you see the time of day, 24 hours. And for each hour, the data show the distribution. These box whisker plots explained here, they show the distribution with these white circles, giving you the mean values that was observed on average at this given time of days. It's important to understand is that at night, pollution levels build up 2-3 times as high as during the day. Yeah, you can see this high at night, drops during the day, and goes up again in the evening. Again, this is common, this is not groundbreaking. Just so you are aware, you're out there, the air you're breathing, it's on average cleaner during the day than at night. And this is mostly driven by meteorology, by how the atmosphere mixes. So if you compare a winter nighttime with a summer daytime sample, that could be 5-10 times different levels in pollutants on average. So you have to be really aware of this behavior if you want to characterize the exposure of the community to air pollutants. And only by doing this continuously, you can capture these very dramatic changes in pollution levels. So the next point, second, I want to show you differences in pollutant levels with location. So we've operated this passive sampling system that collects an average sample over a whole week at these different locations that are shown here on the map. The dots represent the average benzene levels that were seen throughout the year. This has been running now for pretty much a full year. And the difference is about, for benzene in this case, about 50%. You can see some of these locations have lighter colors, which represents lower benzene, and the darker circles represent locations where we found higher levels of benzene within the community. Then we operated this mobile trailer in the picture on the left, and that's been deployed at over 20 locations now. They're all listed here with these arrows, and that's compared with where our permanent station that's listed as labeled as CCF, the Commercy City fixed station, has been running. So another example, this is for methane, a climate gas. It shows on the left side the comparison with concurrent monitoring at these different locations with what we measured at the fixed site, at the base station. And you can see there's, for methane, some very significant differences, a factor of 2 to 3 in the enhancement of methane that we see above the background. On the right side, we're trying to put this on a color scale. So you can see that within the community, the footprint of Commerce City, there can be very significant differences in these different pollution levels. So what I'm going to move on now is point 3, compare the pollution, the pollutant levels that we observed in Commerce City with locations where we operate very similar monitoring programs within the Front Range. These are listed here, and you'll see these 3 letter codes in some of the graphs I'll be showing now. And this will then all be compared with what's circled at the bottom, the data we have from Commerce City. So some of these comparison sites are in Broomfield, in Boulder, in Longmont, and in Erie. Let's start out again with the particles. You saw some of that before. This shows the smaller particles, PM2.5, that can penetrate deep in your lungs. And this compares measurements from the same time interval. So this is full year, last March to actually just a few days ago. The data collected in Broomfield on the left side, and the data collected in Commerce City on the right side. The same time windows and the same concentration scale. You can see the difference in levels and the dynamics and the number of spikes, elevated pollution occurrences we see in Commerce City compared to the monitoring station in Broomfield. which is just, maybe 10, 12 miles away in distance. If you look, for instance, that's in that box up there, how many times the measurements exceeded the chosen here threshold value of 35 micrograms per cubic meter, which seems which is actually the standard that's used to gauge diurnal or full day average national ambient air quality standards. But just to use a metric and compare how often that was exceeded in Broomfield on a shorter time frame, with these minute data, that happened 380 times in Broomfield, and during the same time interval, it happened 12,800 times in Commerce City. So you can see the very stark difference in particle exposure between these two different locations. This puts the particle data on a graph that shows monthly statistics in PM 2.5. And you can see, again, what I showed earlier, that as we come later in the year, pollution levels go up, the spread goes up, so there's higher variability. And you can also see that the circles that represent the mean values for each of these months actually has been falling above what's currently the National Ambient Air Quality Standard for PM 2.5. And it looks like if we continue this a little bit further for a year, that we may actually fall above that National Ambient Air Quality Standard at that particular monitoring location. Okay, a few more examples comparing data from Commerce City, again with Broomfield. This is for hydrogen sulfide. It's a gas that most of you have smelled in your lives. It is this rotten egg smell, and actually if you go into the area, drive through there, you possibly have smelled that yourself. The blue data are the observations from Commerce City, and green, you have to look very, very closely. Those are the comparison measurements from Broomfield. So you can see, there's a much higher occurrence of pollution events, higher number of spikes. The odor threshold, so where we can start smelling hydrogen sulfide, is about 8 parts per billion. So you can see that during this 8 days that are plotted here in Commerce City, we probably had 20 or so events where hydrogen sulfide exceeded the level where we as people can smell it. And if you do this all over the full year, last year, 2022, we counted in Broomfield not a single occurrence where hydrogen sulfide exceeded this odor threshold. In the minute data in Commerce City, we counted that over 7,000 times. Another example, this is benzene, comparing again Broomfield with Commerce City. You can see the differences here again, the data from Commerce City. It's about 2-3 months of data here in this window now in the dark blue, the Broomfield data in green. Broomfield during this time rarely exceeded 0.5 parts per billion, but you can see in Commerce City, we had probably at least 30, 40 events where benzene exceeded 1 parts per billion. And then if you compare the data over the full year, that's in this box on the right side, that's actually the data for December. Those are the mean and the 95 percentile values. So the mean in Commerce City was 0.48, compared with Broomfield or Boulder. At the very bottom is Boulder BRZ, that's the Boulder Reservoir, 0.13. So the average benzene in Commerce City was about 3 times higher than what we see in Boulder. And you can also see this comparison with these bar graphs there, where on the left side, for each month, those are the Commerce City data, and the blue on the right, for instance, that's Broomfield, the green is Broomfield, the pink is Longmont. So you can see how different the spread is and how different the dynamic ranges and the averages and the mean between these different locations. So these now lists, how many do we have here? It's 8 different pollutants in these different rows, and it compares how many times certain threshold values that are listed in the second column were exceeded at these 8 different monitoring sites. The 2 on the left are the 2 sites in Commerce City. For instance, benzene over 0.9 ppb, Commerce City, our fixed station that was exceeded 300 times, more than 300 times. Compare that with Broomfield for 0 Boulder Reservoir 1 time, Lure, this is Longmont 5 times. So you can see the very stark differences in the numbers and the occurrences, how many times certain levels were exceeded between the Commerce City sites. Against hydrogen sulfide, 4,000 times almost versus 0 in Broomfield. Go to the bottom, nitrogen oxides, 65,000 times in Commerce City versus 3,000 in Broomfield, Boulder Reservoir 100 times, and so forth. And the point I'm trying to make here is multiple pollutants, so we don't have one single isolated pollutant that we observe at high levels all the time, but there are multiple pollutants that behave in one way or another a similar characteristic, where we have significant higher levels than at these other comparison sites. This puts the same data in a the same data in a graphical format. You know, as you can see how that compares optically, the number of exceedances in Commerce City compared to these other locations. Okay, want to point out among all the pollutants, it hasn't been much on the list, but we're also here in a non-ozone attainment area. Commerce City is part of this. The top graph shows the ozone 1 minute data over the last summer. Ozone, you know, on a few occasions, almost approached 100 parts per billion. But what counts for regulatory purposes is plotted at the bottom. That's the ozone 8-hour averaged data. And last year, the Broomfield monitor, the Commerce City observations exceeded the national ambient air quality standards. A total of 9 times I counted, and these events are shown there with these asterisks. So next point, 5. Where are the pollutants transported from? What are the sources of these different pollutants that we measure? The way we approach that is we look at the dynamic behavior in the changes and the correlation with the wind speed and wind direction. We do this very fast, basically on a minute scale. We do this correlation analysis, and we use a software tool for that. And when we do this, we generate these plume maps, so these pollution maps, heat maps, some call them. And what they show is, and we can put those on a map right at the location where the measurements are being done. And they show as a function of wind direction, so up is north, down is south, right is east, left is west. They show the average concentration on this color scale that's on the right side of these graphs. And then from the center to the outside is the dependency on wind speed. So at the very center of the colors chart, it's very calm conditions, and it is get windier, and the wind speed is in meters per second. You go further to the outside. I'm going to walk you through some of these examples now, one by one. First one I want to show is hydrogen sulfide. So we saw that earlier, hydrogen sulfide is this odorous compound that we can smell. Very distinct, clear behavior shown on the right side, where there's a very distinct air sector from where we get elevated hydrogen sulfide. And you can see on the color scale, and when the winds are from the north, the east, on average, we get less than 1 parts per billion of hydrogen sulfide. You couldn't smell that. But when the wind blow right from the southwestern sector, about maybe 240 degrees, it goes much, much higher. Very well defined. And on the right side, I put that sector on a map. This asterisk is where the monitoring site is. And it kind of defines where the likely source of this hydrogen sulfide is. And in this case, the water treatment facility falls right in there. And that points towards that potentially being the likely contributor to this hydrogen sulfide. But then when you look closely, this is another analysis. Zooming a little bit further in, there's another emission source that's located to the south of the monitoring station. So for hydrogen sulfide, we actually appear to have two major contributing sources. And again, I showed the sector, and there's several operations facilities there that are different type of operations. I'm not aware of another water treatment facility there. We don't know which one it would be, but it must be somewhere within that sector. Another example, methane. You can also see here how well-defined the methane source is. There's a very strong methane source to the southeast of the monitoring site. Wouldn't know exactly which one of these operations it would be. Benzene, very clear dominance of a benzene pollution source that falls within the southwest. And again, I put the sector there on the map so you can see what falls into that sector for benzene. Very striking observation we have is for propane. This again shows propane data 15 days in December last year. The blue data are for Commerce City from the fixed side. And you can see all these other sites where we're monitoring in Longmont, in Broomfield, in Erie. Those are the other colors, come in much, much, much lower. So it's really striking how many spikes, elevated peaks of propane we're seeing. And when you look at the wind speed, wind direction analysis on the top, you can see again a very, very clear dominance of two sectors from where we encounter these elevated propane levels. If you look at the Scalar scale, when the winds are from the northeast or right from the southwest, levels on average are over 20 parts per billion. Other wind directions, there are 1 to 2 parts per billion. So 20 times, 25 times higher propane when the winds just come right from that direction. Put again the sectors on the map, and there's two propane distributors actually that fall right within these sectors, which appear to be likely candidates for these propane elevated propane levels we're seeing. Okay, last point is our monitoring data for radioactivity. It's a very new measurement, hasn't been done by anybody else in the state in this manner. We measure radioactivity in the gas phase, but also we collect particles on filter, and then we measure how much radioactivity results from the particles on the filters. This has now been running for over 6 months. We have gathered more than 23,000 data points, done the same analysis. We really didn't know what to expect. And very interestingly, we again see a dominance of high radioactivity levels when the winds are from the south, slightly to the west, southwest. And to put this on the map again, the asterisk again is where the monitoring station is. These lines define roughly the sector from where we see these high radioactivity levels. And what I'm showing here is the 10 percentiles of the highest values. So for the gas phase and the particles, if you just look where the 10% of the highest values, so out of, what did I say, 23,000 measurements, the 2,300 highest values resulted mostly from this sector that's again defined on this map here. And you can see that it does align with the footprint of the refinery. We wouldn't know for sure if that's the source at this time because we don't have measurements from upwind of the refinery, but it appears to be a potential source within that sector. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. Just a quick summary, 6 highlighted findings I presented today: the high variability, differences in pollutants with location, pointed out that many of the species we measure are significantly elevated compared to comparison measurements we are doing throughout the state. There's many pollutants present at the same time. It's not just a single one that defines the exposure to air pollutants and air quality. There are diverse sources. For some pollutants, we see a source in that area. For others, we see it in another direction. And then what we find quite interesting too is that there appears to be a prominent source of airborne radioactivity within this area. So that's my last slide. So we'll think we have some questions later.
Thank you, Dr. Helmig. Next, we'll have Andrew Kluster, who's the Colorado Field Advocate for Earthworks, and he has some findings that he did with his FLIR, or forward-looking infrared camera. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, so my name is Andrew Kloster. I'm the Colorado Field Advocate with the environmental nonprofit Earthworks, and I'm also a certified optical gas imaging thermographer. And that means that I have a specialized camera that I can use to document and expose pollutants from oil and gas facilities like Suncor's Commerce City refinery. The clip that you see here on the slide is just a preview of what I'm going to share today. I'm going to share a couple of videos of footage of pollution from the refinery. I'm also going to share with you all some of the observations we've made about the permitting and regulatory process by taking these videos and sharing them with the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. Before I jump into sharing the videos, though, just an overview. The technical name for the camera that I use is an optical gas imaging camera. These are really powerful tools for looking for pollutants because they allow us to visualize gases that are otherwise not visible to the human eye. The camera that I use and the camera that Earthworks uses is the industry standard camera for oil and gas operations, because this camera allows us to visualize the pollutants that are major pollutants from oil and gas processing and production, which are methane, which is a major greenhouse gas, much more potent than CO2 at warming the atmosphere, and then other volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, which includes things like benzene and toluene, as you saw in the graph, some of these concerning chemicals that have direct impacts on human health. It's also important to recognize that VOCs contribute to the formation of ozone. And as we know on the Front Range, ozone or smog is also very impactful on human health. One thing to note before I share the videos, and this is important just for everyone to recognize, is while these cameras are very powerful tools, while they allow us to see where the potential source of pollution is and where pollution is traveling, they don't allow us to quantify that pollution. So this image on the slide right here shows some of the stacks on the refinery, and it shows some pollution, a plume of pollution coming out of one of those stacks. We can identify that plume. We can see where it's traveling. I can't look at this image and tell you how much methane is in that plume. I can't tell you how much benzene is in that plume. That's why it's really nice to sort of give a presentation back to back with Boulder Air, because these technologies complement one another. The camera complements the air quality monitoring technology nicely. So getting into the actual footage, I've filmed the refinery about a dozen times in the last couple of years, and I'm just going to focus on two videos that I'm going to share with you today. One of them I filmed last year. One of them I filmed just last week. So this is a photo just taken with a standard digital camera of the refinery. We're looking at the refinery from the north. I was standing on the Sand Creek Greenway, so we're looking south. This was taken in May of last year. You can see in this photo, it's a relatively clear day. There's some clouds in the sky, but just by looking at the refinery, if you were just walking down the Sand Creek Greenway, you would see no evidence of pollution from anything on the refinery. You see some tanks, you see some stacks. Presumably there's nothing going on. The next slide, I'm going to show you what was actually going on. So this is the stack that was circled on that photo before. And this is what you'd see if you were looking through an OGI camera at the refinery. These emissions are some combination of methane and other volatile organic compounds. We shared this video with the state of Colorado, with the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. And what we learned was that stack in this source of pollution is not actively monitored or measured for VOCs. It's measured for some pollutants, but not for volatile organic compounds, including benzene and other things harmful to human health. More concerning, however, not only is it not being measured for these VOCs, but in the current permit for this stack, there is no limit on the amount of VOCs that it can emit. Really just quick kind of important note about air pollution permits. The way that a permit works, when you look at a source like this, when you're getting a permit, typically that permit will have thresholds for the amount of pollutants, especially pollutants like VOCs, that can be emitted. And those thresholds allow for enforcement to occur if pollution exceeds that limit. If it exceeds that threshold, then you can potentially follow up, you can intervene, you can look for more control measures, you can potentially hand an operator a violation for exceeding that limit. If there are no limits, if the permit itself does not have a limit for a major pollutant, that really constrains what accountability can be sought in regards to controlling that pollution. So moving right along, this is another photo of the refinery. This is from just last week. This is from Monday of last week. Once again, I was standing just north of the refinery on the Sand Creek Greenway. Once again, you can see in the photo, there's no visible evidence of any sort of pollution occurring. There is some steam off to the right, but nothing coming from any of these stacks. And I have once again circled the stack in question that I'm going to show you on the next slide, the emissions from, and this is actually a different stack than the one in the previous video. So this is what was actually going on from this source. A massive amount of emissions that were carrying well across the horizon and into the atmosphere. Shared this video as well with the state just last week with the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. That's what I learned, was that this source is also not actively monitored or measured for VOCs. It does in its permit have a limit, however, and that limit is 13 tons per year of VOCs that it can emit. They also told me that in December 12th, 2022, before the refinery shut down, Suncor tested the VOCs from this stack for an hour-long window. There was a 60-minute test. State staff were not present. It was just Suncor. And that test determined that the VOC emissions from this stack are below the threshold levels. And because this test was conducted months ago, prior to the refinery getting shut down and now actively sort of progressively starting back up, which shut down, start up, a lot of pollution that can occur that isn't even just routine pollution. You also saw the graphs that Detlef showed about how variable pollution is just over seasons and over a day. But because this 60-minute test had been conducted on December 12th, 2022, this video went nowhere. Very little interest from the state in taking any action based on this evidence of pollution from last week. And unfortunately, that is par for the course when you are sharing evidence with the state of Colorado. I'm going to return to a slide from that Detlef shared. This is, once again, the propane emissions that are detected from the Commerce City site in comparison to all the other Front Range sites. You see the massive amount of propane that is detected in Commerce City at the monitoring location. And Detlef also shared this slide, which shows the potential sources of these propane emissions, including this AmeriGas propane facility that's just north of the monitoring site. Boulder Air has shared this information, not just publicly, but with the state, with municipal staff from surrounding municipalities, with multiple different regulatory agencies at the state. Thus far, there has been no interest in really getting to the bottom of these emissions and really looking deeply at what's going on here, where these propane emissions could be coming from. Again, this is an example of the fact that when you are collecting evidence as a third party, as a community, regardless of how rigorous your methodology is, regardless of whether or not you're doing the exact same thing that the state is doing, that evidence is not given the full weight of evidence. It's not fully considered when enforcement is considered. It's not fully considered just in terms of in comparison to what a permit may say or what a test may say from months and months and months in the past. So to just wrap up really quickly, and I will be around for the Q&A session if people have more questions about the camera and the videos, but to wrap up really quickly, some of these just observations overall from what I've shared today, just by looking at a few sources, just by filming a few sources and inquiring about a few sources on a refinery that has hundreds of sources of potential pollution, we can see that right now the current permits are not really providing a full understanding of the pollution that the local community is potentially being exposed to. We have major sources on the refinery that are not being measured or monitored for major pollutants from oil and gas activities like VOCs. They also, some of these sources do not even have limits to the amount of VOCs that they can be emitting. Stemming from that, because enforcement authority is defined by what's in a permit, if you have permits that are extraordinarily lenient and permissive, that don't even have limits for major pollutants, it really, really constrains what sort of enforcement can even occur. You can't hold someone accountable for violating a limit that doesn't exist. Third-party and community evidence, as I just covered, is not fully considered. It's not treated as evidence. The state has to replicate our findings themselves in order to take any action, no matter what, again, Earthworks or Boulder Air does, no matter how rigorous our methodology, our data collection is. And what this really all amounts to, and I think this is my important takeaway point for all of you to consider, for a facility like Suncor and many other polluting facilities in the state of Colorado, regulatory compliance as it currently stands doesn't equal true accountability for pollution that is occurring and is actually actively impacting people. You know, we know Suncor violates its permits. Even if Suncor did everything by the books are not written in such a way that people have a full accounting of the pollutants they are being exposed to and the pollutants that are actively harming them. I mean, just to be honest, we would not all be in this room right now if the regulatory status quo was working. So that is all. I will be around for question and answer.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And as he stated, there's many times that Suncor, even with existing regulations, continues to exceed the established limits. And so next we'll have Dr. Brown to provide a public health perspective. Because what we're trying to do at Cultivando is really not just talk about regulations as they stand, but to talk about the impacts on human health, which is not happening. And there are no longitudinal studies to show what the impacts will be on people who have been living in this community for decades, for children who have grown up in, under these horrific conditions. And so next we'll have, I think we're trying to set that up. Thank you for hanging in there. We knew this would go a little over. We just have so much information to share. And we're happy to, again, to stay afterwards and answer any questions that people might have.
Let's just review a couple seconds. The data that you've just shown talks about exposure of people to mixtures, and it talks about a very, very high short-term exposure, short-term being a few seconds to sometimes a couple of hours, and they include a mixture of compounds. So the question that we really are interested in is, what is the effect in the community on this mixture of compounds that they're being exposed to? Now that turns out to be a real problem, because the compounds interact with each other. Now, I'm not sure these slides are going to work, but if they don't work, because I'm just not getting them back here, I'm on the wrong computer. But if we go forward a bit, you'll see, I'm sorry, guys, my slides are just not downloading. So I'll just go through the points that I want to make for you, and then we'll have to see if I was hoping that you could put them on from your end. One of the problems with trying to regulate based on a single compound is that the compounds that are present in the air enter the body, and they do more than just add effects. For example, 2 irritants don't make it twice as irritating. It could make it 10 times as irritating. One of the primary problems that you have in this particular situation is that you have fine particles. If you look to the left of the slide, you'll see a little yellow or pink dot, and that represents a particle. The particle, as it goes down that arrow, gets a little bit of water on it. Now that thing that looks like the sun is supposed to represent the irritant particles that are present in that cloud. All of those irritant particles are soluble in water, and they get on that, all those irritant chemicals get on that small PM pieces of PM, what we were calling PM, and that when the child inhales it, instead of the irritants being caught in the upper respiratory tract where they're not much of a problem, they're carried into their deep lungs and produce a much more serious effect. So the problem that we have here, if we're trying to set a standard, we really can't set it by any one of those standards standing alone. We have to set it considering the fact that the compounds are interacting with each other at that site. That's very difficult for the agencies to do, because they don't usually regulate by synergistic toxic actions. But it's very important that if you're looking at the health of somebody, that you look at it that way. Those statements down the side simply say that they pass this protective action. The amount that goes down is a function of the number and the size of the particles that are coming down. The smaller particles are much more toxic than larger particles because they have larger surface area. Water solubility has something to do with it. The particle itself doesn't have to do anything, although PM 2.5 does. All it's doing is carrying this, transporting that irritant chemical that people are being exposed to from a place where it's not too toxic to a place where it's very toxic. And that we usually say those increase the uptake somewhere between 3 and 20 fold. Now, can you go to the next slide, please? Okay.
Hey, you're
Here-
good.
I'm good. That's perfect. If you look, this slide talks about health standards versus regulatory standards. There seems to be some confusion about what you should be looking at. If you're concerned about the health of people in the neighborhood, you should be looking at health standards. If you're concerned about regulating large areas such as all of Boulder, you should be looking at regulatory standards. Now, notice that these bars, this is what I'm pointing at is benzene. This scale is a log scale. The higher the particle, the higher the bar, the less toxic it is. But now notice if you will, that these are health standards and these are regulatory standards. And notice that the health standards, some of them, remember, these are orders of magnitude, are far below the standards that we have here for the regulatory areas. So if you're going to think about benzene, for example, and you're going to say, we want to keep the benzene levels in Boulder at some particular level, that's fine. But because of the variability that Helmick showed you, you can see that there's points in time when those values are way over that, and they're producing effects in this area. This slide is ethyl benzene. It's just to try to make the point more clearly. Now that I hope is important because that's the difficulty when we try to set standards for the people in the community and they don't fit the standards with the people for the entire regulatory area. And the reason is that we're talking about health effects. They're talking about regulatory monitoring effects. The next slide will make that a little clearer. Okay, these are the form and the purpose of federal standards, and form and purpose refer to what are they for and how long do you measure. Standards for air and water are designed as regulatory compliance. That means that you have to be able to show, okay, I'm sorry about that. So the standards for air and water are regulatory standards. And they have to be reproducible, which means you have to take them for a long time, which is why the state and the local people are giving you regulatory averages, because that's what they need to do. And they achieve stability in their measurements by averaging the data out. But the form of the standard is important. An unstable standard can't be used to regulate, but the unstable standards are exactly what you need, a standard for those low concentrations if you're trying to prevent health effects in the people. And this is the red bar, the red line, simply say, people are being episodically exposed to multiple chemicals at high concentrations. But the standards that we are using at EPA for the NACs and such are not designed to look at variation or mixtures over short terms. But that's what we have. So we absolutely have to consider the only option. We have three options, actually. The first option is to lower the standard by some factor, and most health departments do that when they're looking at that. The second option is to go into the community and make a record of what sort of health effects are people reporting. And the third is to take that or go to doctors and do a assessment of the community to find out what's happening and at what level. We have the data to do that now, but I'm not sure that it's been done. Okay, these are the Cultivando alert levels. Now, one of the arguments is that our levels are too low. They're not too low because of the problem I just described. And we show benzene here, and these are the toxic effects of benzene. It causes drowsiness, dizziness, damage to the immune system, and World Health, that stands for WHO stands for, and HSDR said there's really no safe level for those exposures. But there's a level that you cannot get below because it's just there from other things. Hydrogen sulfide is a very toxic compound, produces fatigue, headaches, and dizziness. And because it's so difficult. It has never really been tested to see whether it's a carcinogen, so we just don't know. Sulfur dioxide, we've known for years, causes irritation, burns of skin, eye, nose, throat, causes coughing, shortness of breath. And that could be what you're experienced when you're at these situations that we're getting in the homes. What the people are telling you is probably right. We shouldn't tell them that they're not, the standards are probably wrong, but the people are probably right. The next one we have down is PM 2.5, and that's the usual standard, but it irritates the eyes, nose, throat, complicates asthma really seriously, and causes hospitalizations for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. And this level is an air level for monitoring, but the level should probably be even lower than that. But I'm not going to argue with that point. Toluene is the most frequent compound we find around these sites. This is what it does. But you notice here's an irritation of the eyes, here's irritation of the eyes, here's irritation of the eyes. So that you've got multiple compounds present. Go to the next slide. Okay. Ozone, which is formed from these compounds, it's a standard that's usually used. You're probably getting ozone. I'm not sure that, and it causes bronchitis and emphysema. Not sure you're getting it from the for those people close in are getting it from the plant, because it takes ozone a while to form. But I wouldn't swear to that. Hydrogen cyanide is a very toxic compound, as you know. But again, it's irritating the nose, throat, skin, eyes, coughing, and wheezing. So now how many compounds have we identified that does that? And what are the people telling you is happening? Finally, we get particulate radioactivity. Particulate radioactivity is very serious because it is probably, we're not sure what the radioisotope is. Well, we are sure what the radioisotope is, and that tends to produce lung cancer, but it also tends to produce cancers of the blood system, but doesn't do it right away. It takes a while for it to do it, and so that's something that I would worry long term about. And methane is what they want. Methane is what they're trying to make. They're losing a lot of it. Methane is really toxic if you inhale it and then light a cigarette, because it will blow up. But methane levels, as you bring your levels of methane down, the levels of these compounds also will be down. That's kind of what I wanted to say. I'm very sorry for the mess up on the slide presentation, but this is what I think the take-home level is. You have combinations of chemicals. They're interacting with each other. They have similar actions. You've got a particle agent in there in the fine particles in the soot that are carrying those chemicals to the most dangerous parts of the body. And that's why you're seeing people who are ill. If you wanted to do one single thing, you would get the particles out of the houses, because in the middle of the night, people are waking up, having difficulty, and children who with asthma are waking up trying to catch their breath. That's because the particles in the mixtures are going into the house. Those particles may be well below what the standards are that you're talking about, but they're interacting together. So the health effects are the mixture. The health effects are not individual chemicals. I'll be happy to answer any questions. I think I have about an hour. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. We're going to have a Q&A session at the end. If you'll stick around for questions then.
I'll try to do that. I have to leave at 2 o'clock my time, and I'm in Connecticut.
That's the only Zoom person.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. I wanted to add while we set up for the next presentation that Porters. And so they reported that during the closure of the so-called closure of the refinery back between December and January, when they were out there, they were experiencing a lot of the symptoms that Dr. Brown mentioned. So again, it wasn't much of a closure. People were led to believe everything was closed and the skies would turn blue and the birds would come singing, but that's not really what happened. And also our community is told that a lot of the symptoms that they face are either not real or hereditary, although they don't run in their families. And when they're out of town for holidays, children have none of those symptoms. So there is a correlation. So I just wanted to also mention that. And next we have Dr. Ramona Beltran, who's a professor right here at the University of Denver, who also supported our project with doing some health questionnaires to assess the impact on people's mental health as well. So with that, Dr. Ramona Beltran.
Yo senchim anyavu. Buenos dias. Good morning. Thank you all for being here. First want to honor and acknowledge Cultivando and all of the people who have been working tirelessly on this project to document what community has been saying for decades. I want to also give gratitude for the honor it is to be invited to document and rigorously analyze these stories and make them more legible and visible. So I am an associate professor here in the Graduate School of Social Work. I'm the co-investigator of the social science component with Dr. Stephanie Malin, who's here. And I want to I know we are short on time, so I will go as quickly as possible. We'll tell you a little bit about what we're looking at, review the demographic summary and some very early preliminary findings. We're still in data collection. We're simultaneously doing transcription, translation, coding, and analysis, but we're really in the middle of it. So these are early findings, but I think that they do highlight what you've learned so far through some of the other presentations. So this is our phenomenal team, and I just want to acknowledge them as well for the work that they've done. And also not pictured here is Tina Hulama, who's just joined the team, and she's over there, also part of the Graduate School of Social Work. So what are we looking at? We are looking at the lived experiences, the stories of what happens to people who live, work, play, pray near Suncor. We're looking at the social and environmental justice impacts, perceptions and experiences of the health effects. How does this affect daily life, the daily quality of life? How does this impact stress levels? What are people's feelings about their health in relation to the refinery? What about the natural environment? What are their perceptions related to that? The impacts on their family, as well as their feelings of power and agency in relation to monitoring and mobilizing around Suncor. So I want to just highlight before and I'll let you read this, so I won't go through the whole thing. This is truly a community-based participatory research project, community-centered participatory research project. So aligned with that and the principles within that approach to research, we've really been led by Cultivando and by the folks who have been mobilizing. And so the questions that emanated from our relationship building and developing and designing this project really come from them in relation to what their lives have been like. So, so far we've talked to about 48 people. We still are hoping to talk to 10 to 20 more, but this is the demographic breakout of the folks that we've talked to so far. So a little bit more, let you read through that. So now jumping to preliminary findings. As I said, we're still in the middle of data collection, but these are the things that we have found so far. And these emanate from in-depth interviews. And we've had our folks out in the field since about last spring. So it's moved pretty quickly, but that to me is evidence of investment in telling these stories. So we have found chronic negative impacts to the quality of life, disinformation or a lack of information, lack of awareness about the Suncor facility and what is done there, and absolutely concerns about the impacts to the health of vulnerable populations, particularly children. So I'm going to prioritize the original story from the participant, and I will read the translation to you. So this comes from one of our participants, and they said, in fact, one of my children, the eldest, surprised me when he told me, "Mama, they are practically poisoning us," laughs and then sighs. For example, my other kid has always been suffering from dry skin. And there was about 4 years ago that it also seemed very strange to me that 3 of my comadres were pregnant and suddenly lost their babies. You know, there are a lot of children here and people with asthma, and that is a common theme as well. Asthma, nosebleeds, headaches. People have talked about this quite a bit. There are concerns over the water quality, people talking about the way that it smells, the way that it tastes. There are chronic negative impacts to stress levels. So just feeling stressed throughout the day, every day, living close to the facility, but also due to noise and traffic, as well as releases and risks from the facility. And we heard stories that folks experience economic dependence or environmental blackmail to support of the ongoing functioning. And here's another quote. Regarding the water, it's very dirty. The water is dirty. It even smells different than anywhere else. Since we arrived here, we buy bottled water. We go to buy and fill our gallons and bring it home. And it's the water that we use to drink. It was much better in Aurora. Even in the kitchen faucets, the bathrooms, the showers get dirty sooner. One has to be cleaning them faster. So in addition to this, there was also a strong sense of fear and dread that has emerged in interviews with people who are aware of what the facility does. There are also some structural vulnerabilities that people have talked about, such as immigration status or persistent poverty, that can keep people from speaking out against it, being able to move, or feeling like they can organize around their concerns. So we have found significant early evidence of the negative impacts to quality of life and stress levels, feelings of fear, disempowerment, and lack of access to useful information. There are specific concerns about the water quality and the multiple kinds of environmental exposures and health effects. Like I said, people have talked about their kiddos having regular headaches and asthma symptoms, a persistent cough, nosebleeds. So with that, I will wrap it up. Unless there was anything, Dr. Millen, did you want to add anything here? Nope. Okay, good. I know we're on time, so I cut this really short. It feels like I was up here and now I'm leaving. So, but here also for Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Malin. I didn't realize you'd walked in, got busy. So now we're gonna wrap up and get ready for the Q&A. I wanted to remind everyone, you might recall the incidents in 2019 that led to the passage of SB 181, the Colorado Oil and Gas Act. Many politicians and public figures said it represented a sea of change in the way the oil industry would be regulated in the state. I wanted to share a provision from the law which explains the legislature's intent in passing the law. 34-60-102, Legislative Declaration 1A. It is declared to be in the public interest, and the commission is directed to regulate the development and production of the natural resources of oil and gas in the state of Colorado in a manner that protects public health, safety, and welfare, including protection of the environment and wildlife resources. My question to you is, do you think after watching the presentation today that the state is upholding the requirements of the law? No. And after hearing the presentation, how many of you would like to live day in and day out with the pollution in the Suncor neighborhoods? Raise your hand. So then I ask you, why should our community be sacrificed for the sake of cheaper gasoline? Why do our children need to pay this price? And looking at the demographics of where we are, this is a case of racial discrimination, environmental racism, and environmental genocide. And we must act now, and we need everyone to play a role in this. We must put pressure on our Colorado Department of Public Health and the EPA to actually update regulations and that allows them to do their job, which is to protect public health. We are a nonprofit organization in Adams County. Why are we being asked to do the job of government? Why are they being allowed to drop the ball? And why is Suncor being allowed to continue to operate with little to no accountability or enforcement of even existing regulations? And so I wanted to also bring a face to this situation. These are the people who live in our communities, and many more are here in the audience. And it's not okay to tell us that this is just in our head, that this is not real, and that no change can come of this, because we will not accept that. And we are going to continue to organize and inform people until we are heard and real change happens. So now we'd like to open it up to questions. Several of our presenters are still here, so folks are welcome to ask any questions at this point. Okay, it looks like we also have some questions coming in from the chat. And it says, thank you for this important information that was shared. It's important for our community to remain informed. I have a question. What are we planning to do to protect our community, in particular our youth, in front of this reality that we are exposed to dangerous toxics that harm their health? What are the steps that we will take, and how can people become involved? And so as we share, this was supposed to be a one-year project. We're now in year 2. So there are many opportunities to get involved. We have information and updates on our website. Our website is getting set up. It's bilingual, and it will have color-coded alerts for community. Anyone could get on there. So green, if the air quality is safe; yellow, if you should be careful and stay indoors, especially if you have children or people with compromised immune systems; and red, if you definitely should not go anywhere. Just like in 2019, where our schools and businesses were forced to go on a lockdown because the air outside was so toxic. So you can get involved by following our work. We have many opportunities, as Dr. Beltran shared, especially for people living in our communities, to be part of these research studies, to get involved with our partner organizations. We have organizations like BPUF here, Black Parents United Fund. We have Green Latinos. We have Eco Madre. We have Moms Clean Air Force and many others. So we're not doing this work alone. We have Earthworks, many, many others. So there are opportunities. Get involved. We are planning some workshops to tell the community about toxics and our work. So right now, our project was to document this data, to prove what people are experiencing. And then the next actions that will come really are from the people. We can't look outside of our communities for solutions and for someone to come save us. We have to determine what actions we need to take for the benefit of our communities, and all of you can play a role in joining us in this fight. Yes, there's a question. The question is, are there any Denver mayoral candidates that are in support of our work? Right behind me, there's Ian Tafoya, who's been very involved and is part of Green Latinos. I think he's very knowledgeable about the work that we've been doing. I personally have not been approached by any other mayoral candidates to talk to me or our community about what is happening.
Good day. Thanks for making the presentation and making today possible. How do you feel about, what do you think about the chances of Cultivando being in the room, maybe even with some of the experts who talked about how cumulative impacts from multiple contaminants are more important to measure than the regulatory levels and permits every time the Colorado Department of Public Health has a public meeting to describe how great everything is when it comes to meeting the standards and getting permits out? I know you probably might be resource drained, but isn't it time to get both sides of the story in perspective all the time at every formal meeting?
Definitely. I think that our voices have not been heard in the past. This is actually the first time we've had a big public forum. We had shared these results with our impacted community a couple of weeks back because we felt it was important for them to learn what was happening firsthand. And so, yes, we are aware that Suncor has messaged about how great things are at the refinery. We are aware that the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment insists that everything is just fine. And so it is time for us to share what we are finding on the ground, and we will continue to do so. Do we think the state would allow for that to happen? We've been in conversations with the state, and I will say we're not necessarily on the same page in terms of how we're presenting the data. And so that continues to be an ongoing source of tension. We hope that they will join us and really protect the health of the community.
Hi, I have a comment more than a question. My name is Dr. Rosemary Russo. I teach here at DU and I work for Commerce City. I'm the only environmental planner that works for Commerce City. A few months ago, there was a law, fence line monitoring, and the state set regulations. And then thankfully, Cultivando and other people wrote letters, technical letters, legal letters, and they changed the regulations. It was the most stringent regulation Suncor had in 20 years. There's a new law, GEMS 2, it's about to come out. Bill from Denver, the Denver team. We've been talking to CDPHE for a year now, and now it's time for public comment. And I think it would be great if they got inundated with letters for GEMS 2. There's a website that Commerce City has. I always put every exceedant Suncor has because it's very hard to find it on their website. The other thing is, like I said, I'm the only person in Commerce City that works on environmental issues. And you can imagine all the environmental issues in Commerce City. And so we have a small amount of money now. I did research on the best trees for particulate matter reductions. So particulate matter is how all these toxics get into your system. So if people want to help with that project, please contact me. Any of the DU students, I'm in the graduate program. If anybody wants to do a capstone, we need a team. The city manager jokes around that I'm a one-woman band. And I go, yeah, I'm singing the blues. So if you could get us some help. I'd like to recognize we do have a council member here, Council Member Noble. She is the biggest supporter of environmental issues. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, Christy Douglas, sorry. The dynamic twosome, they actually have a letter that's going to see CDPHE and EPA, and it's about the permit and strengthening the permit. But I'm telling you that fence line was a big win. And so we need a few. Gracias.
Thank you.
I had a question. When Dr. Brown was presenting, and he said, keep the particulates out of the home. I worked for 30 years in Commerce City, a teacher. That's why I'm up here to see some of my people. It was great to come back and be a part of this. But I worked at the school where they pumped outside air into our building for the heating and cooling. And when somebody says, keep the particulates out of your home, I want to know how. And I want to know who's going to go and make sure every home in Commerce City has it. Because you know what? In the summer in Commerce City, we sleep with the windows open when they're polluting us the most. And as soon as we wake up and people from outside come to work in Commerce City, suddenly it gets low. And then when those people leave town, it gets high again. It's not right. Meanwhile, this district's going to be shut down because they say the kids don't score well on tests. Well, geez, pollute yourself and see how you do. Every afternoon, I sent a kid to the nurse for nosebleeds every afternoon without fail. Not to mention my own health, which went down the toilet and my doctor said, quit your job. And I said, no. I've had friends who work there who have brain cancer. I've had students who were diagnosed as middle schoolers with thyroid cancer. How the hell does a 12-year-old get thyroid cancer? It's real. And I hope you all remember that map Detlev showed. We're within 10 miles. Commerce City and Swansea and Elyria are a canary in a coal mine. And that canary is dying. And the same things killing us are just a few hours away from where you live. And the president of Suncor made sure he lived a good 30 miles from the plant.
Thank you.
I have one. I'm Sheree. I'm the executive director of Black Parents United Foundation and Brown Parents United Foundation. So we're going to be doing this monitoring. We were very inspired by the work with Cultivando because they're the only ones on the block that were doing this work, especially a brown, Latino-led community. So folks of color are doing this work, which is unfair because we shouldn't have to. So we're doing this work also in Aurora because we have the fracking wells there. And we know that when those wells are being drilled, they are going to be refined there and Suncor. So don't think that just because you're living in a certain mile radius, Suncor affects everyone. So my question is, I've talked to you on several occasions, what are some of the barriers? Because we've never done this in Aurora either. Honestly, Aurora wants to partner with us, but they're the ones that are approving the fracking wells. So, it's weird that these things are happening, but we need to know as a residents, a neighboring residents, what are some of the barriers that you guys have faced? Because I know it's hard work. And it's honestly, when we think about the funding that it comes from, it's not a lot, honestly. Sometimes when you think that, oh, an organization gets $1 million, no, baby, that $1 million is gone because the companies are worth billions. So this is nothing for them. So what are some of the barriers that we can take as we start this work in Aurora that's going to better help us? Because we know that there's going to be pushback. We know that Aurora is trying to be our friend. They've even changed their department to like be called environmental company or department, just so they can show as if they are on our side. And we don't know, right? So we're hoping that we can find out what their intent is. But what are some of the barriers that you guys have faced doing this monitoring over the past few years, only maybe 1 or 2 years, that we can take as we start this work in Aurora?
That is a good question, and it would probably take me like an all-day meeting with you.
I
to
already
go
said,
through
I don't
everything.
want an Olga answer because I already know Olga answer would be very blunt.
Yeah, I think think a lot of the things had to do with just educating our community about toxics. How many of us grew up talking about toxics in our homes and understand science, environmental science? And how many of us grew up going to city council meetings and knowing who our elected officials were and being invited to those tables where decisions were being made for us? And so it's going to take a lot of outreach and education and being very direct and very courageous, because we have a responsibility to protect the health and well-being of our community. This is new for me. This is new for all of us. You know, we're how do they say, building the plane as you fly it or something, and with no parachutes also. So these are some of the things that you are going to brace yourself for, but as an organization, we're here to support you every step of the way. And you've got Lucy Molina here, who I want to highlight, you know, as a champion of environmental justice in our community. She is the reason many of us were even involved. She got tired of screaming and yelling and going in and out of emergency rooms with herself and her family, her children. She's still not doing the best. She has sacrificed her health, her mental health, you know, trying to advocate. She's the one who came to us and shared stories. And I'll never forget her story and the story of many mothers and your story, who said, you know, we're living here every day. We have not been heard. We've been saying these same things for decades and no one has heard us. And community was so desperate that they came to us as a nonprofit organization to support them and to do air monitoring. You know, this is like a David and Goliath kind of situation. We do much more than environmental justice work at Cultivando. So it's a huge lift. But what struck me was her story and the story of many mothers who said, my children have nosebleeds and headaches and asthma, and we're bringing them to school late every day. And rather than get support, the school assumes we're abusing our children and threaten to report us to Child Protective Services. So can you imagine what that does to a mother, to a parent? That just raises all kinds of fears. And don't get me started on the fears that come as a parent of color, especially. So it broke my heart to hear her and other moms saying, now that I know it's happening, I feel terrible. My children are sick because I'm too poor to move. I did this to my kids. And we're here to say, Lucy and all the mothers, you didn't do this to your kids. Suncor did this to your kids. A negligent government did this to your kids. People who are not listening did this to our kids. And we are listening, and we're going to keep working together until this changes. Thank you for getting this started. Any other questions?
Could I make a comment?
Yes, we have space in Cultivando. Anyone could email me. It's so easy, olga@cultivando.org. And as was shared by Rosemary in our city, we are also looking for things that community members can do. We will continue to do tree planting, working with organizations or remediation efforts. We know that there are plants and fungi that can help clean our soil, clean our air. It's all we can do right now, but we need so much more. So please do reach out to us. We can always use volunteers and support in any way that you can.
Olga, to that point, I just want to let everyone know we will have a sign-up sheet at the end of the event around noon for you to just give us your name and email if you want to be subscribed to our newsletter, to catch up with updates with Cultivando, to be added to a list. We're going to just share that email list with AIRE and with Cultivando, as well as for those who are on Zoom. We have your email address already. If you don't want us to use it, let us know when we email you. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. I think the rest of us will be around if individual reporters would like to speak to us. I know that there's a lot of follow-up questions. Gracias a los miembros de nuestra comunidad por su valor, por el amor por sus hijos que los ha llevado a ser las guerreras de justicia ambiental y de todas las cosas. Sin ustedes no podemos hacer este trabajo. Gracias a mi equipo de promotoras chingonas también por todo lo que hacen. And thank you to DU for hosting this and everyone who's here giving us some of your time, as well as our team of scientists. Oh, we have Christy
I
Douglas.
have one last comment.
Yes.
Christy Douglas, council member from Commerce City. I just want to note the incredible courage that you, Olga, all the people from Cultivando and Lucy Molina, you wouldn't believe what it took for them to go up against the Goliath. And they did it. So I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
I know it's depressing. It is for us, but we wouldn't be doing this if we didn't think there was hope, if we didn't have support. And so we are hopeful we will continue in this work. We believe change is possible. We believe the power lies within all of us. And thank you so much for being here.